So the big news last week was that Google agreed with Fitbit that Fitbit would become a Google company now, or some mix of the sorts. I'm Jason Cipriani with Jason Perlow. This is Jason Squared, and today we're going to talk about Google's acquisition of Fitbit. Jason, what are the basics here? What are the terms?
Well, essentially, Google is going to purchase Fitbit for about $2.1 billion in cash.
Which is kind of a steal given that Fitbit, share, I think that's a $7.35 price per share is what they're going to purchase them at. But at one point, Fitbit was over $50 a share. So really, $2.1 billion is quite a discount on what Fitbit once was.
Yeah, the company value has devalued quite a bit in the last 2-3 years or so. The other thing is that, at the time, about a week before, when Fitbit announced its earnings, it talked about its declining, sales, and a lot of Wall Street estimates kind of thought that their devices business was effectively worth nothing at this point. So, Google kind of has jumped in as the white knight to save them. And I guess we need to sort of talk about why we think they did this, right?
Yeah, well, so I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. If the hardware portion is worthless, that leaves data and software, which Fitbit OS, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the data portion of this going to Google is kind of big.
That's right. So, I mean, what Fitbit has produced is sort of like a health wellness cloud infrastructure, much in the same way that, when Nest created its cloud infrastructure for all its IoT devices, this is kind of like the Internet of Human Things, right? Google really has not produced that sort of health cloud for its own Wear OS stuff. So presumably they would take this cloud infrastructure and integrate it into their existing cloud services and then produce devices, that can utilize it, right? And now as to what operating system those devices use, I think that's up for discussion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, Google has its own wearable platform called Wear OS. It used to be called Android Wear. They rebranded it and had this big relaunch, but they really didn't do much with it. They tweaked a few things, and they license it just like they do Android to hardware partners in hopes that the Samsungs and Huawei's and LG's and Fossils of the world will adopt it and put out great products, great hardware. They usually use Qualcomm's Snapdragon mobile processor on a chip. Right. They have a specific processor for wearables, but in total, it's a wide belief. Wear OS is just horrible. It's slow.
It's the worst performing smartwatch operating system I have ever used in my entire life. I mean, I had a Huawei watch. I had another thing. I had one of the earlier Galaxy watches before they switched to Tizen. Now we know why they switched to Tizen.
Absolutely.
But, yep. And let me tell you something. There's no comparison between Tizen and Wear OS in terms of how well it performs, how well the developers are committed to it, all those things, right? There's certain things that Android is good for. It's not good for a watch.
No, it's not. All. So I guess the big question is, and Google, when they announced this acquisition, Rick Osterloh, who's the head of the hardware division for Google, that everything is folded into Pixel phones, Nest, and now Fitbit is going to be folded into that. Does Fitbit stay independent, or do we end up seeing Fitbit folded into the Wear OS paradigm and slowly start to see Fitbit OS have an impact on Wear OS and improve it? And do we see hardware change as well? And another thing, Osterloh said that, Google is committed to making its own Pixel watch at some point. So, there's a lot of factors going in there, but what exactly does Google do with all this Fitbit data and, hardware and all of that?
I mean, they still need to resolve the operating system problem, right? Because right. Wear OS, as it is today, does not perform well with the current generation of smartwatch chips that Qualcomm has, right? So unless they make a chip change, or I don't know what they're going to be able to do to pare Android down to becoming usable and agile and fun to develop for on a smartwatch platform. We know that Fitbit OS performs extremely well.
Yeah, I love it.
But it's not Android, and it doesn't really have a lot of developer support.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So that's problematic. I mean, are they just going to, rename Fitbit OS to Watch OS and hope nobody, pays any attention to it? Or they're going to, I mean, are they going to merge the two? Or are they going to change the main interface for Watch OS? I don't know. I don't know what exactly they can do to re-engineer it to put lipstick on a pig, literally, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
so if I tend to believe that Fitbit OS is going away.
Hmm.
They're going to keep the back-end cloud infrastructure. They're going to add that back-end cloud infrastructure to Watch OS. And I actually believe that Google will produce, not Watch OS, Wear OS, but they will produce Watch OS services and apps for the Apple Watch in the same way it has done for iOS and their cloud services, because they chase users, they chase revenue, right?
Okay, so
and
you're saying
I think capturing data from that set of users would be very beneficial to them.
so you're saying they take the magic that Fitbit has in its health and fitness tracking, turn that into an app instead of a hardware aspect, and put it on the Apple Watch?
That's what if I was Osterloh, if I was in charge of it, yes.
That
Because
makes a ton of sense.
if you take a lot of what Google does with their services today,
Yeah.
yes, they have Android, but they also have this huge user base on iOS, right?
Yeah.
Where you have Google Maps, you have Gmail, you have Calendar, you have YouTube, you have all those things, right? There's no reason why you cannot bring those health cloud services that Fitbit has created to iOS as well. And I think that may be a quicker route for them to get a user base than for them to try to launch a watch, which could take a year or two before we see one.
Yeah, it was a long time after Google purchased Nest and Dropcam before we saw actual hardware products come out of those acquisitions. So yeah, that was one thing I thought about as well after they announced this, was how long until we see a Google hardware Fitbit watch? And usually that's 1 or 2 years by that time it closes, because it's not expected to close until sometime next year. And then you have a year or two of development and getting caught up and whatnot. And essentially what you're saying, I think, is they replaced Google Fit, which is a horrible app.
Terrible.
It's confusing. They replaced Google Fit with Fitbit. And,
yes.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Fitbit the app.
Yeah, Fitbit app. But then it brings a big question of whether or not you trust Google with all of your health and
that is
data.
Really the elephant in the room, right?
Right, and it's not even just the data that you would create if that app was to exist, but it's the historical data of what Fitbit has collected for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
They have sleep patterns, they have heart rates, they have location. There's a ton of very private.
Yeah, and then suddenly you start to throw Google's machine learning assets that it bought from the other companies that's bought over the last 3-4 years. Then things start getting a little, Black Mirror-y, right?
Exactly.
Do you want to give corporate programs, corporate wellness program managers at your large enterprises access to that data to see how their employees are doing? Or mandating that? And you really want to be? I've been part of various corporations that have had wellness programs. They're like, yeah, you know what? If you put this Fitbit on, right? If you put this thing on and you start tracking and you start gamifying this with your team members, we'll give you all these cool discounts and things. But meanwhile, you need, and by the way, we'll lower your premiums on health insurance or whatever if you use this thing. So who knows? If they're saying, oh, you've been sedentary for too many hours today, you didn't go out and walk during the weekend. I don't know. I don't like that.
Sure. And Google and Fitbit knew this part was coming. So both of them in their press release announcing the acquisition, included language talking about how Fitbit will continue to put users in control of their data. They'll remain transparent about the data it collects and why. And that both Google and Fitbit have committed to never selling personal information from Fitbit Health and Wellness, and it will not be used for Google Ads. Can we trust that?
No.
Yeah. At some point, that data is going to, like you said, machine learning, AI, it's going to commingle with all of our other tracking information and web browsing history and there's no way Google leaves that completely alone. And hey, hopefully regulators, as they go through approving this sale, mandate that they have to leave it alone. That would be great if that was a stipulation on, this acquisition, but I doubt that would happen. An interesting report came out the day after Fitbit agreed to this, and it's that Facebook was actually in talks with Fitbit as well. They wanted to pay about half the price. I think
I don't know what, Jason, I don't know which would have been worse in this scenario.
I think Facebook would have been worse personally, just because they have a track record of just not taking care of our data at all and flat out lying to our face. And I'm not saying Google's completely honest, but Facebook's track record over the last 2 years has been horrible. The deal didn't go through. I think Facebook, the information is who posted this. Facebook said that, or it said that Facebook wanted to pay half the price of what Google did. So, I think Fitbit and CEO James Park kind of had to face the decision of which is the worst of two evils. Well, this one's giving me more money, so let's go that route. I don't know,
Facebook has, track record with data is terrible, but Google's track record with integrating companies that it spends lots of money on is terrible. I mean, look at what they've done in the past 10 years. Now, the first 10 years, I said in an article this week that they did a good job with their acquisition, but they weren't spending largely, 300 plus million on places. They were doing $50 million acquisitions, $10 million. I mean, Android itself was a very small acquisition. I think what is in 2005 or 2006. I think they only spent $50 million on it initially.
Yeah, it wasn't much.
And they had a couple other ones that were in kind of the same value that they added to it to make Google Play and all that stuff. But nothing, Android, Android for all its crap that we know that's wrong with it, right? As far as the ecosystem, all that, it hasn't been a money waster.
It's made them a ton of money.
It's made them a ton of money, and it wasn't a large expense in terms of what they had to buy to create those assets. Now, you take a look at Motorola Mobility.
Yep, that was a flop.
$12 billion, sold for a $9 billion loss. I don't care how many patents you think that they acquired as a result of it. That's a lot of money to lose.
Absolutely.
Okay? Nest has, if you look at what was disclosed as far as the internal culture of that company, trying to integrate it into Google with Tony Fadell and all those guys, having all these horror stories that went out to the press about how messed up things were internally. Now they've completely botched their entire works with this IoT ecosystem and caused all these partner products to become abandonware. That's a complete waste. Ended up being a complete waste of money. Then you've got a whole bunch of other things in the $300-500 million range that were a complete mess. I mean, and Fitbit looks like to be a repeat performance of those things.
Yeah, let's hope that's not the case. I think under Osterloh, things have kind of settled down and they're finally starting to get into a groove. But then you take like the HTC acquisition where they, bought all the talent from HTC to work on the Pixel phone. And then you have the Pixel 4, which is by and large widely considered not a great phone this year.
No, not a good phone. And HTC, by the way, used to had brilliant design people,
absolutely,
brilliant engineers. They made fantastic products for other companies for many years, including products that Google had during the Nexus phase. They designed quite a few things for them. So it's not like these people aren't talented and smart. My concern is that when Google gets its paws on something, it wrecks it.
Yeah,
right? It doesn't allow these engineers and product managers and people to truly create the products they want to create. I mean, if you look at it, it feels like they micromanaged it on a lot of different levels, and now we ended up with a product that was micromanaged. We have a product that is battery deficient. We have a product that's memory deficient. We have a cameras that are really not competitive with what's out there on the other devices at the same price levels. So really, I don't know what they did to HTC, but it feels like a waste of money now.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, but maybe this is one of those things where it's 2 years out. It's only been about a year since that happened. And I know they had a very strong hand in designing the Pixel 4, but maybe they joined that cycle too late. I don't know. I don't want to make any assumptions, but hopefully they're able to right that ship, with the Pixel 5. And what's interesting as well about this Google Fitbit thing, and one thing we have to consider is how powerful Apple has made the Apple Watch in the entire industry. Within a week,
it's unstoppable.
Of the Apple Watch Series 3 in September being announced that the price was going to be dropped down to $199, Fitbit immediately began the sell process. They hired someone to begin looking for someone to buy the company. They knew their time was up. And that is from one product from Apple, which is insane because just a few years ago, the Apple Watch was still one of those products where we really didn't know how it was going to be used. And Apple's been able to turn that around.
Well, the problem is if you're an iOS user, right, the natural product to use is this thing. Why would I go and buy a different vendor's product
Yeah.
If I can have this, which is so tightly integrated into that device, right? Now, if I'm an Android user, what am I gonna choose? Well, if I'm a Samsung customer, I'm probably getting a Samsung watch.
Yeah,
And
the
if I'm a
Galaxy Watch.
third-party Android user, I'm probably also getting a Samsung watch as well, right? So
Yeah.
there's right now the Wear OS offerings are not very strong.
No, they're
So
horrible.
what am I looking to get at this point? You know, as a customer. So I mean, really, you know, whatever Google comes up with as far as a smartwatch, it's going to be a very, very strong offering compared to those two other products.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Honestly, I hope Fitbit stays an independent company within Google, and we continue to see Fitbit products with Fitbit OS Googleified. Is that a word? It's going to be now. But you know, I don't want them to throw Fitbit OS away. And keep in mind, Fitbit OS is Pebble OS, because Pebble, the
Yes.
original company that started smartwatches, was bought by Fitbit. And that's how Fitbit OS came about. And now Google has Pebble OS and Fitbit OS to work into Wear OS, which sounds like a lot, but you know, there's a lot of history there with that.
You know, this whole story, it feels like deja vu. Like we saw happen with Palm and some of these others, where they get absorbed and then they don't know what the hell to do with the assets, right? And, you know, and then, you know, it's sad. You know, because you have a lot of smart people worked on a product, they really busted their asses, and now this is the end of the road. This is it's Silicon Valley's story over and over and over again.
Yeah, but and unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. The big guys eat the little guys, and you know, something bad happens along the way to products we grew to love and use on a daily basis. So, you know, whoever's watching this, you're on YouTube, maybe on zdnet.com. Why don't you leave a comment and let us know what you think? Do you trust Google with your Fitbit data? Apparently, there's going to be a process to export or actually delete all of your Fitbit data once the sale closes. Are you going to export your data over to Google? I don't know if I am. Probably not. But what do you think? Leave us a comment. And I think that's a pretty good place to stop. Jason, what do you think?
I agree, Jason.
All right.
And but I'll tell you what, I'm not migrating off my Apple Watch anytime soon. Absolutely not.
Well, yeah, you have a pretty good backstory to that. We'll get to that at some point as well. I'm Jason Cipriani.
I'm Jason Perlow.
Make sure to catch more Jason Squared comments and topics on zdnet.com.